किसके लिए?
She's calling me. She's like,
Q. Good evening and thank you for joining us. My name is Faye D'Souza. You're watching live with Faye. Every evening, of course, we have a conversation on a matter we believe is of national importance. Like I keep saying, this might not necessarily coincide with what the rest of the news is picking up because we choose based on what we believe affects the most number of Indians. Today, we're talking about child malnourishment in India. And I do know that a lot of people will not find this a very exciting topic, might not get great views, but it is something that could topple progress in our country. And it's something that we have to pay tremendous attention to. Based on numbers coming out from the National Family Health Survey, which is government data, it shows that India could in fact be reversing decades of progress, which you can see on your screen, decades of progress in child malnourishment. Now, based on what we're seeing in this data on its primary trends, it shows that 18 out of 22 states show an increase in the number of stunted, wasted, or underweight children. That's the data that's up on your screen. Now, stunting among children under the age of 5 is when the weight is low for that particular age. Wasting is when the weight is low in comparison to the height, based on what it should ideally be. And underweight, as you know, is when the weight is low in general. This is what we're talking about right now. And also, India oddly finds itself in a curious situation where economically we've had our economy grow in the last 5 years, but our hunger numbers have actually worsened. So why is that happening? These are the questions that we're going to ask. Why is India falling behind? Why is it that our economic growth has not resulted in us solving our hunger problem, and what the remedies could possibly be? Joining me in this discussion this evening, I have three guests. Ms. Poonam Muttreja is the Executive Director of the Population Foundation of India. Ms. Neerja Chowdhury is a very senior journalist, someone I respect tremendously. And Mr. Ravi Duggal is a public health activist. I welcome all of you to this conversation. The idea is, of course, to help us understand the issue better and figure out what it is we're doing wrong and how we can fix that problem. So my first question is to Poonamji. Poonamji, if you could help us understand the implications of this data. How bad is it, and what would it mean for our country if these numbers are going to continue to worsen? Poonamji?
So this is the most disappointing performance among some good. Can you not hear me?
Yes, I can now. Thank you. Hang on, you seem to be on mute.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead now.
Okay, so the NFHS 5, within NFHS 5, this is clearly the most disappointing data. And what does it mean for India? First of all, it means that we have not been able to change, in spite of Poshan Abhiyan, earlier governments focusing on malnutrition, we have not been able to do very much. And I see this, what this means is one, the first is that 20% of the kids are born in any case with a disadvantage. And we know that. We haven't recognized that 20% kids are undernourished or malnourished also because their mothers are malnourished. So we haven't learned to value women and have our adolescents and have our women to feed them and deal with anemia. It shows enormous insensitivity from a gender perspective, and things we already know we didn't do very much about. So undernourished mothers give birth to undernourished babies, early marriage. Second, we have not been able to, I don't understand something that science has taught us, that it is between the first 6 to 18 months determines a lot of the, whether it's a lot of the malnutrition. And why is it that we haven't been able to use behavior change, or should we call it health information, and reach to mothers to begin feeding the babies after 6 months, giving food, and how often and how little. Even the poorer households can afford to give just a katori of dal or chawal or half a banana or something or the other to the kid, and that we need to feed them frequently. Later on, even if the midday meal is not going to, the midday meal is not going to help them beyond a point. It's only when they go through the second spurt. So it is a failure of all of us, including the government, in trying to get it right and communicate. And also it just shows the lack of respect and value for girls and women. And finally, I think it's a national shame for India to be in this situation.
Well, let me take our audience through a couple of the numbers. Stunting, like I told you, which is low height for a certain age. 38% of the children in our country are stunted. What does this mean? This means that 1 in every 3 children, counting even the ones from the rich families in the big cities, 1 in every 3 children is stunted in our country. Wasting, 21%, which is 1 in every 5 children is wasted in our country. Neerja Chowdhury, if I understand correctly, when we don't feed our children between the ages of 0 and 5, their brains don't develop strongly enough to compete to their full capacity. And so we are actually sentencing them to a lifetime of poverty, because they'll never be able to compete with children who have been fed well enough.
I think Faye is feeding children adequately and feeding them the right things with adequate micronutrients and vitamins that they need to grow. So it is not just feeding. You can be, you have food security with wheat and rice, but is that adequate? So, and the damage that has been now proved, that the damage in the first 2 years of life is irreversible. So whatever you may do afterwards to make up, you're not going to be able to make up. Therefore, what you're saying is absolutely right. Cognitive, brain development, productivity as adults. I've seen people who are, you see them all over India, listless. And I used to often wonder, where does this come from? So I think a large population, you are saying 1 in 3, I would say 2 out of 5, that it's almost, reaching 40%. Yesterday when this news came, it has been a stark year, Faye, but this was so depressing. Because certain indicators have become worse: stunting, wasting, undernutrition, anemia. In rich states like Maharashtra, 70% has gone up to. Gujarat, a rich state in the west of the country, 80%. If 4 out of 5 children are anemic today, what future India? I mean, it is really, as I say, it has been very depressing news. But I would say that the reasons, we have to go deep into the reasons, because it's not that effort has not been made. And Poonam referred to Poshan Abhiyan that was launched in 2018. And I would say I have criticism to make on one count, but I think the impact of Poshan Abhiyan probably has not been captured in this survey because the Abhiyan was launched in 18, it probably got going in 19, and the survey was done, mid 19. They started to be done. So I think it's not fair to say that Poshan Abhiyan has not had the impact. It has brought in huge energy. But where I would make the criticism is that energy has gone a lot to create visibility rather than ground level programming and reviewing and monitoring that is necessary, and which is the dull part of the work, but which may yield more results. So I would say that we need to look at it hard. Why are we in this situation? And it will require data research. A lot of people will want to give up, and say things are not working. But we really have to, as I say, knuckle down with greater vigor. Because
Right.
if our children are going to be like that, then there is no future for India.
Ms. Chowdhury, as journalists, this is something that you and I can afford to examine today. You said quite rightly that this is the most disappointing news to come out in 2020 for Indians, and I felt that personally myself. But it hasn't really been picked up by the media. It hasn't been given the importance that it should be given what is at stake, which is the future of this country in no small terms. Are we also at fault in the sense that we do not give this enough visibility? And so the government, we know how this works. Government doesn't feel the need to solve problems if there's nobody crying about it.
Faye, let me say one thing to you. As personally, when NFHS 3 came out, that was winter of 2006. And I remember at the breakfast table reading this news aloud, half of India's children malnourished. And my husband turned around to me and said, "You have been the political editor of a national daily for 10 years. Don't tell me you did not know it." And I did not. Nor was it given, you're absolutely right, it wasn't given importance in political reporting, in political discourse, not the kind of importance it should have been given. But that has changed. That has changed over the last 12, 13 years. You, Faye D'Souza, are today discussing this. And it was news on the front pages yesterday. Now, it is true that it is not picked up. It should have been a splash, across the newspapers, this kind of news. That is not still the case. But there has been change. And malnutrition does figure in budget speeches. It does figure in parliament. It is exercised MPs, it is exercised state government, but it needs a high priority. And I would say, I would make this suggestion on your channel today, that I think the time has come possibly to have a separate ministry for nutrition. Yes. And put it right under the CM or the PM. So it gets that kind of importance and the kind of what we call, what is called in jargon convergence, which is coordination between different ministries, whether it's health, WCD, education, rural development, Panchayati Raj, which are affected in one way or another. They all can work together under the chief executive of the state. I think we need to be far more vigorous and determined than we've been before.
Because we are running out of time, Mr. Duggal, I want to give Mr. Duggal an opportunity to make opening statements before I go back to Poonam ji. I know she has something to say. Mr. Duggal, there are many plans in action right now in the country. There's a lot of money, although not enough. We know our health budgets have actually been shrinking over the last few years, and that's unfortunate. And we paid the brunt for it during COVID, really. But why is it that our programs are not working? I also want to point out, like Ms. Chowdhury said, Poshan might not have been fully captured. Also, the Prime Minister's insurance scheme, government representatives say might not have been fully captured in this. But why is it that the endeavors that India has been doing for the last many, many decades have not shown any sort of real result? Because it's not just this one government. This is a problem that successive governments have been seized of.
Yeah, you're right in that sense that it's a historical kind of thing. See, ICDS was introduced way back in the 70s, okay, mid 70s. and it's that older program. But you see that the allocations which are made in budgets to ICDS is ridiculously low. I mean, if you look at, I mean, ICDS should be catering to 17 crore population. That's 15 crore children and about 2 crores lactating and pregnant women. Okay, so that's the total. Now,
This is, well, forgive me, this is the Integrated Child Development Services that aims to
yes,
feed
yeah,
pregnant mothers, lactating
and
mothers,
children,
and
children
all.
below age 6. Yeah,
Yes.
so that's the population which it has to be targeted. But the budget is something around 25,000 crores for across the country, which is a ridiculously small amount because this is daily nutrition to children and these women. So even if you look at the formula which the governments have in terms of making the allocations, 9 rupees per child per day or whatever. So using that formula also, we are looking at least 50,000 crores should have been the budget. Now we know that that formula is grossly inadequate. Okay, and it is also linked to PDS because the food grains come from there for the rice and the wheat, etc. The
Yes.
other thing which Neerja mentioned about we are a wheat and rice kind of PDS system, which doesn't provide you the proteins. So pulses which used to be there in the 60s and 70s, along with sugar and kerosene and other things, they've all disappeared from the PDS system. So our PDS budgets have also been slashed drastically. If you look at healthcare, primary healthcare approach is very weak in this country. And you can look at certain states, why do they do well? Tamil Nadu, even Chhattisgarh does quite well in terms of nutrition. You have they invest a lot. If you look at the budgets, Kerala, the northeastern states, many of the northeastern states, so they invest enough in primary health care. So they spend nearly 2 to 3% of their state domestic product. Spending 3,000, 4,000 rupees per capita. So that's a huge amount compared to the national average of only 1,800 rupees per capita on healthcare. So all these things are kind of interrelated and integrated. You you require the support of primary healthcare. You need enough food to be given through the ICDS system for these small children so that they get supplementary nutrition, and as well as and the whole politics around this food. What did Madhya Pradesh do? They removed eggs from the menu of the ICDS, and which was giving protein, and this was done on religious ground, which was ridiculous because the in MP and Chhattisgarh is a large tribal population who eat meat, who eat all kinds of food stuff. So I think this is the other thing which drives how budgets are allocated, what is the content. So it's a completely top-down kind of supply oriented program rather than a demand-based, need-based program. Whether
Let me
it's
bring Poonam. Yes, yes, Poonam ji, just to respond to what Mr. Duggal said about delivering eggs on midday meals, and we also know that the boiled egg is actually the easiest way to give a child adequate protein per day. But also, we're talking about children between ages of 0 and 5 who are not in the midday meal program because effectively they're just starting school, if at all.
it's also in ICDS. The
No,
eggs
Therefore,
are in
ICDS.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So where have we gone wrong, Poonamji, with the ICDS and the midday meal program? Also, these are numbers from 2019. In 2020, we know the midday meal program failed because schools closed. And so children who were getting the midday meal were no longer getting the midday meal. And what is the likely impact of that?
So I shudder to think, and that's what I was going to raise, that since kids are not getting midday meals, ICDS centers aren't functioning, situation is going to get exacerbated. But going back to your question on it's ICDS, which Ravi raised, ICDS program, I didn't only say, in fact, I wanted to respond to Neerja also. Poshan Abhiyan is a recent program. I said all the programs the government has had, and ICDS is my big issue here. ICDS, not only, as Ravi rightly said, the budgets are inadequate, but even, Faye, the budgets that we have, look at the quality of food we serve. Neerja and I have been together to ICDS centers. In fact, Neerja, you'll remember in UP, when we went, and we went with a group of political leaders across party lines, we found that the ICDS center had come up a day before we reached. There was no ICDS center a day before. So there is huge inefficiencies, corruptions, and poor governance, even in the ICDS small budget program. Can you, I mean, you know, some of us even fear when budgets increase, unless we get our governance right and the pilferage going, we, you know, just increasing budgets isn't enough. So what has failed us, Faye, is the lack of any commitment to running these programs properly. I always say we are a scheming society. We roll out schemes, we don't know how they function. And ICDS is one program that has been evaluated, unlike most other programs, and it showed so many different deficiencies, but we haven't done very much to change. Everybody knows ICDS is a very inefficient, ineffective program, though it's a good idea is good, the concept is good, but we just run it very badly. Second, we have to also learn from the states what happened in the states that have done well. Bihar, how is it that Bihar has done well in NFHS 5, for instance? They've shown improvements with regard to stunting and underweight. Karnataka has shown better results on all three parameters. And finally, you know, I do want to say that again, going back to gender dimension, I don't know how much of it also is impacted by the fact that women, you know, workforce labor participation rates have gone down, and substantively. And I'm not referring to COVID, I'm referring to pre-COVID too. We know over the last 4 years. And so how does that impact that anemia has increased, but malnutrition has increased? And so do women, you know, does women failure in entitlement of women's income, does that have an impact? I think we really need to find, as Neerja said, we cannot get complacent. We have to find what is the right way to go and act now. We only react when NFHS or other data comes out. But at this point of time, I am blaming our programs throughout, and also convergence. The health ministry and ICDS cannot work together, I believe, at the national and even state level. So I would go by what Neerja said, either chief minister. I am not sure about chief ministers, but I think if you give the district magistrate the responsibility for convergence and doing something in each district, we could see a change. And we absolutely need people's accountability. We need people to participate and be part of the ICDS program and decide whether they want eggs. It is the most ridiculous. I wish I had shared, and I will, Faye, with all three of you. There's a map which shows how wherever BJP is in power, not just in one state, Ravi, there are no eggs. So you can see eggs on the map of India. How can that be a decision made on these grounds? And South India, I mean, most of southern part of India has eggs because we don't have BJP there or NDA there. I'll stop there.
Does anyone on the panel want to respond to the eggs issue?
Well, it's elementary, Faye, you know, that the choice should be given. If, of course, if there are children and families who don't want to eat it, that's a different thing. But certainly that choice should be given, and it used to be given. So, I mean, it's something where the BJP governments need to do a rethink. The other very serious thing that this survey, and the whole thing has not come yet, many of the larger states are yet to come, UP, MP, Rajasthan, Jharkhand.
Yes.
They will come in the middle of next year. So it's only some states that have come. But the double whammy of obesity that is on the rise, which this NFHS 5 points to, it's a very worrying phenomenon, because that points to both are the kind of agriculture and crop and food we are getting, and number two, the junk food we are eating. and the level of malnutrition in the urban centers, which has not had the kind of attention again that it deserved over the years. So I think it's we also need to look the other, the anemia part of it bothers me personally a great deal, because a country like India, where with this demographic dividend with young women, and if you travel, you would have noticed it also, Faye.
Yes.
The kind of aspirations that teenage girls in India today have. There have been surveys recently, a year and a half ago, a survey called TAG, which was done by Nandi Foundation and Mahindra Group together, which was it was almost like, if I remember right, almost huge. It probably was the largest. How much was it? 50,000. Okay. And you know what the finding was? The finding was that the girls wanted the age of marriage to be increased. They didn't want to get married at the age of 18 or below. They wanted it increased to 21. They wanted to do a job before they got married. And thirdly, they wanted to be skilled in the modern profession. They wanted to learn computers. They wanted to learn English. They didn't want to be taught stitching and sewing and those kind of things traditionally associated with them. And the aspirations of these young women are just enormous. I sometimes think we could change India if we could tap into this. And we need to tap into it. And these are the women who, they will get married at the age of 13, 14. I've seen, when you go to public health centers, I've seen 17, 18-year-olds with, pregnant, one baby, an infant here, and one catching hold of a finger, that kind of a thing. So, and anemic, and early marriage, early production of babies, and as Poonam was saying, underweight mothers producing underweight babies, and it's a cycle you can't break into, and that is one of the reasons it used to be said that our figures were worse than sub-Saharan Africa. And therefore, I think we have to look at agriculture. We have to look at teenage girls as a source, and not only as recipients of relief that must be given and good food that must be given, but education that must be given, autonomy of decision making that must be given to them, but also look at them as agents of change for the future. So all these things we need to look at in a much more holistic fashion, and therefore I think at the policy level, and there have to be major changes, and at the program level we have to have greater review, monitoring, follow-up. And I agree with Poonam, where situations have been different, bureaucrats have made a lot of difference. Nandurbar is, a district in Maharashtra, in the north of Maharashtra, tribal dominated. That is done well, Faye.
Yes.
And I know there it's because of the good programs, it's because of determined NGOs and very dedicated bureaucrats. I was there and it was quite impressive the kind of work they were doing, and it's shown results now as reflected in this survey.
They actually taught the women of that area how to grow various vegetables and to improve their own diet by the vegetables they were growing in their backyard. But just to go over the numbers that Neerja ji was talking about, the rate of anemia among women in India is 50%. Half the women in India are anemic, and this is simply because hum ladkon ki roti ginte nahi hai. The boys eat first in this country. The boys get the jaggery and the ghee and all the good stuff, and the girls don't, and that results in underweight anemic girls who are then married off early. When they get their periods, it becomes worse. Their anemia gets worsened. They get married early. They have babies that are malnourished. They aren't able to adequately breastfeed because they are weak themselves. And those babies then go through a lifetime of inadequacy. The silver bullet, it would seem, to the problems of this country is to feed our girls. Yes. And somehow we just haven't let that sink. Feed the girls, dude, feed the girls. The question, actually, I just want to take this back to the panel. The idea of inequality, and this has been raised, from the numbers that the World Health Organization has released, the UN has released. India has seen economic growth among the best in the world, but our hunger numbers keep increasing, and there isn't anywhere else, no other country in the world shows economic growth and an increase in hunger at the same time. What are we doing wrong? Why is the growth in our economy not reaching the people who truly deserve it? Again, I'm opening this up to the panel, to anyone who wants to explain to us, why is this happening? Mr.
Yeah.
Duggal, if you want to come in, why are
Yeah.
why is it that we've become richer as a country, but our people have become hungrier?
Yeah, that's the paradox which we see. I mean, if you look at the global hunger index, India has come down from 97th position in 2016 to 102nd out of 117 countries. So we are in the bottom 18 in the world, and so it's a paradox. So, but the thing is that the growth is it's a kind of very class kind of growth where it's it's um, it's the top probably 10% or 15% of the population which has improved the economic status at the cost of the rest of the population. So the large majority and 2020 data, when it comes out, you'll see that it's got worse, given the COVID scenario, the loss of livelihoods, etc. So clearly, India is becoming, where hunger is concerned, probably worse than some of the worst African countries. So that's where we are heading towards, despite our economic growth and corporatization, and our companies are becoming global players, etc. So despite that, we have not looked at healthcare and nutrition are two elements which we look at globally. We are at the bottom, clearly at the
Poonam,
bottom. I mean, where healthcare is concerned, we are seventh from the bottom in terms of public health spending. So that's where we are. And I think these are the two most neglected areas, healthcare and nutrition. And that is why you see this kind of a paradox
yes.
which emerges.
You know, Faye, I've been saying for the last 4-5 years, look at, while the inflation rates, the economists and the government tells us 6, it's decreased, it's increased only by point percentage. But if you look at the cost of food products, of basket of food, the increase is almost 100% in many areas, including vegetables and fruits. And I just don't understand why we don't look at the food basket when we look at inflation, because the poor in India spend 80 to 90% of their incomes on food, right, Ravi? When the prices are going up the way they have been of food products, including pulses, I'm saying a few vegetables went up by 100%, and not all vegetables, but large number of vegetables, pulses, the prices have gone up, wheat, everything. Why will you not expect people having less food in their stomachs, especially the women? As Faye said, they are the least, they eat the least and the last. Second, I think we also have to look at the issue Neerja raised of junk food. There was a time people had a lot of coarse grains within the resources they had. But now for, bread, every village, there's a guy who goes with a ghanti and sells bread today in India. Are they having breakfast of bread rather than roti? Not everybody, but some. So I think we have to look at what we are eating too, because this enigma, as Ravi called it, is something we really have to break. Finally, why can't, with so much technology, information technology, and communication possibilities, why is it that we are not reaching information on feeding practices, especially the importance of feeding in the first 18 months and what it does to the brain of the child? Every parent, one of the aspirations have changed, and the aspirations of the poorest parent is to educate their children. And that's one of the reasons they're having fewer children. Why is it that we cannot match their aspirations with information on how to get there for their children? I think it is not only feeding that is going to help, but the fact that, families do not know that a small amount of food after 6 months, several times, we've seen programs on breastfeeding, but women are not able to breastfeed the child every 3 hours, which is what is needed, 3 to 4, an infant, that's what the baby needs. Women have to do the household chore, going collecting fuel, working in the house, animals, working in the fields, taking care of other kids. And again, because they are malnourished themselves or anemic, they are not able to even produce the milk. Why is it that we cannot, why can't we share, do some behavior change communication, do some health education? I am sure people are going to respond differently, apart from feeding and improving our public health. Then finally, the public health. As it is, you have undernourished children, and then you have the kinds of diseases which our primary health care is ICU. It is so weak, and we don't have coverage. We don't have universal health coverage. And we need that as a way of ensuring equitable, effective, and efficient healthcare for the population. And finally, I do want to say that the food distribution, Ravi also raised that. We really do need to change we have to relook at our PDS.
We have to look at our PDS. I just want to bring in Neerja ji on this whole point. When we talk about, the headlines that we like to bandy about as a country, the India growth story, wanting to be a global superpower, the youngest country in the world by demographic, fastest growing economy. What does all of this really mean if we are not able to solve this problem of hungry children and anemic young girls?
Faye, if you can talk about wonderful infrastructure, you can talk about, as you say, the growth story. But if 3/4 of your population, which is women and children, are going to be the way we find them today, then what is the future for India? What is development, governance, infrastructure? What does it add up to if women and children continue to be anemic, malnourished? Because that is where your development is going to come, of your human resource. That is how the country or society is going to go forward or not go forward. But I would bring you also to what came to my mind. Does demonetization have anything to do with these figures? I mean, it's too early to say whether there is any connection, but the large number of people who lost their livelihoods during that period, particularly in the informal sector, did it mean less food, quantity-wise, quality-wise, for their families, for their children? I think there should be some research. And I would say that, say, if a year down the line we were to do another survey after the pandemic and the slump in the economy that we are seeing today, what would the figures yield? Probably more serious figures, more serious a situation. Therefore, I think we need, our policy people have to really wake up and sit up. We all have to. It's not just the governments or the political class alone. We all do need to do that.
I want to point out to our audience who are asking, you can look at the Global Hunger Index. There's an interactive map that you can find on the internet. India's Global Hunger Index score as of 2020 was 27.2. Let's compare other countries with a similar score. Ethiopia, 26.2. It's a better score. Sudan, 27.2. Kenya has a better score of 23. Tanzania, 25. And this is what we kept saying, our guests were saying about sub-Saharan Africa. This is where we are rating at this point, and we haven't improved. Whereas our neighbors, countries like Sri Lanka, countries like Thailand, countries like Vietnam, have improved drastically. Turkmenistan have improved drastically in comparison to the work that we have done. This should be a cause of great pain for us as citizens that we failed here. And like pointed out by Bharat Rabal, one of our audience members, he says he's shocked that even in 2020, we're still having the same problem. We were taught about this in school. We were told that India is a hungry country, that the children are not being fed enough, that the women are malnourished. Today in 2020, we have not found a way to solve these problems. We've actually made it worse. Mr. Duggal, the question now comes to what we need to be doing. And there are enough people asking, what can individual citizens do? Is this a job for individual citizens? Can they intervene in any way? Or is it only purely left up to government to solve this problem?
See, that as Neerja was saying, I mean, post demonetization, I mean, she's right that livelihoods were affected, and you have the figures now. You have unemployment rates going high. Unemployment is much higher now than it was prior to demonetization, and that means your livelihoods are affected. So you have less money to buy food, and that affects children and women, etc. So clearly. What we should be doing, I think we should be supporting the grassroots economy much more, because that's where you create livelihoods. For example, I think look at the farmer struggle today. I mean, that has got a lot to do with malnourished children. I mean, if for instance, across the country, MSP was implemented, people in Bihar and other Odisha, etc., got also MSP, they would have much more money in their hands in the rural areas also. So these are all interconnected. So today we are failing our farmers by passing those new laws, and that will make the situation worse. So we need to change that. We need to stop buying our food. I know, especially this was precipitated during the COVID time, buying our food from supermarkets and from online providers. Go down to the local vendor. I've seen vendors vanished in my area where I live. I think there were 30 vendors earlier. Now there are only about 10 left. So that's the kind of change that one is seeing. So those 20 vendors have either gone back to their villages and have not come back. So we have hit their livelihoods very hard. So as middle class, I think we need to reflect on that. I mean, how do you support local economies? Because that's what will make the people buy. We may not have a very kind of fancy lifestyles, but I think that will contribute to strengthening the local economy, and that's something which the middle classes, like I keep giving this example that when the middle classes left the public health system, it destroyed it. Mumbai had excellent public health facilities, and the strength was because the voice of the middle class. They left it, they moved on to insurance, the employers started paying for their insurance, and that kind of destroyed the public health system. So the same is happening with all these new kind of laws being passed, whether it is the farmers' bills or whether it's the new labor codes, which are destroyed. The new labor codes are going to destroy the existing social security system and make things worse for the workers. So, and that will precipitate hunger, malnourishment, etc. For instance, I mean, one more figure I wanted to indicate is that under 5 mortality, while child mortality may have kind of stagnated across the 2 rounds of NFHS, from NFHS 4 to 5, but more than 50% of under 5 mortality is due to malnourishment. It's an astounding fact, and this nobody talks about that. So you have to look into dive deeper into the character of the malnourishment that we see.
Yes, and it was also written about quite a lot that when we were talking about the encephalitis breakouts in Bihar and in Uttar Pradesh, the key ingredient to a child dying of encephalitis is malnourishment. Exactly. Malnourished children don't have the ability to fight off diseases that other children would fight off.
Reducing your immunity, etc.
Yes. So the other thing we should realize that a shocking number of children in our country die of diarrhea, where in other countries, it's something you take your child to a clinic, they medicate you and you're fine. In our country, they die because they're already so weak that they cannot withstand a bout of diarrhea. But I just want to ask Poonam ji if she's picked up, or Neerja ji if you picked up information about this. Anecdotally, from the people around me, I found out that the free ration program that was launched by the government during the lockdown, it was called the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, PMGKAY. was extended till the end of November. So December onwards, the free ration has stopped. What impact will that have, and can we afford to make that? And again, I want to point out, I've only found this out anecdotally. We haven't done a check across the country. But is this what you've discovered as well, Poonamji?
I'm not aware if the PDS has stopped. Quite honestly, I've not heard from the field yet that the PDS has stopped. But I do want to say that PDS, in any case, gives you rice and wheat. It is, you're not getting very much else that where inflation rates are very high and the families need that. And second, there are a large number of poor households that do not have ration cards. As you know, ration card, even getting a ration card is a very political issue for people, in terms of, they have to pay to get a ration card. And one way to target the poor, Faye, is to increase the wages of under Neerja, so that people have, I don't know why we are stubbornly not increasing the wages with the kind of inflation that is happening. And rations, we have to make it more universal. Do all the poor in India have ration cards? I believe not more than 50%. And even those who do have ration cards don't get the rations, don't get the entire amount. And we are going to see, if rations have stopped in December, we are going to see very serious consequences at this point, when there is such high levels of unemployment, when people are also very stressed. Not only women losing jobs, men have lost jobs, and a large number of people have gone back. And finally, I want to say, there is no getting away from India. If one response, we really are serious, we have to give social security to the poor in this country. We have to give a minimum amount. I don't know what it is, but it could be 2,000 rupees for people to buy food, every poor household. Finally, I want to say that we always say, as Ravi said earlier, the better off are doing better in the economic advancement that has taken place in the country. But why don't we begin with the worse off? Why don't we begin with the most deprived to start our programs and ensure that we reach them, including we need cash transfers and social security across board for the poor across the country. And also, child mortality is totally explained by the poor, not totally, is explained by the poor nutrition, but also which has remained stubborn over the last 5 years, and it has increased over the last 5 years. It has reduced barely by 3%. And finally, to answer your question, what are we supposed to do? We have to give better health coverage to those, yes, to those who are already undernourished, but if they have one bout of diarrhea, they do die. And as you said, in other countries, they don't die. So investing in universal health coverage and universal PDS and social security is the way forward until we can do something more, improving ICDS and other programs. And the press, sorry, go ahead.
There is a question that keeps popping up about the amount of food that our Food Corporation of India has purchased and is rotting, and why that is. Again, keep circling back to the fact that this is wheat and rice mostly, and our problem extends past wheat and rice. Neerja ji, is there an issue there that we're not able to solve?
What of just wheat and rice, or reaching?
No, of stockpiling and rotting. And
yes, absolutely. That's over 7 decades have gone, and we've not been able to create a chain of storehouses where food can be stored. I mean, for all the technology, the brains, the wealth in this country, I mean, that is a shame. I mean, it baffles me why this has not been able to, why this has not happened. And you talked about the kind of growth. We have the largest number of billionaires and the largest number of hungry children. Yeah. So that is the contradiction, where our growth and development story has gone. And recently I read that 1900, in the context of COVID, people were saying 1900 children die every day in India because of causes of malnutrition. Now, if you have 1900 dying of COVID, you had huge amount of uproar. But this happens day after day, year after year, and there is not the kind of outcry. Faye, in the last 10 years, as I've looked around, I've come to the conclusion that malnutrition is the most important issue in India today.
Yes.
Really, without combating it, without dealing with it, there is simply no future for India. It's more important than education, skilling, all that comes later. Of course, it's linked to it, it's a complete cycle. But we've got to take it seriously. It's got to be, it's got to come on our radar as one of the important issues to address and really find solutions to.
There's a
Hey, I'm going
question.
to excuse myself. I'm going
No,
to
but
excuse.
before you go,
Yeah,
Poonamji, very
yeah.
quick question. Aman Peshawari has asked a question that I'm very happy that you're here, so you can answer it. He says one of the main causes for this problem is population. Poor people have 8, 10 kids because they want a son. What can be done about this? There's a lot of misinformation or
This is myth.
misled in this question. Do you want to just quickly address that before you leave,
Yeah,
please?
I will. I'd be very happy to. First of all, poor people are not having 10 children anymore because they want to feed their children and they want fewer children. One of the best news in NFHS 5 is India's population is stabilizing. There was a time people had 10 children out of ignorance, and yes, right now also there are several families that do have more children waiting for a boy, but there are plenty who also do sex selection. So we have this problem of adverse sex ratios, which has got worse, but population is stabilizing across India. And one reason I believe population is stabilizing is because people do not have they can't feed their children, they can't send their children to school. So this is a myth that India's today, it has changed a lot. The average wanted fertility rate in India is 1.8. People don't want more than 2 children. What they need is, we need greater agency for women and decision making and access to contraception. In India, access to contraception, we spend only 4% of our budget on family planning, of which we spend only 1.45% on temporary methods. And a large population in India is young people who don't need to plan families, they need access to contraception. So we really need to ensure that women have access to a basket of choice. We need to improve our public health system. If one area we desperately need to invest more money is in family planning, and 4% is of the meager 1.2% that we spend on health. So it's not 4% of our GDP or our budget. So it is a myth that people want to have more than 10 children, and government's own data shows that. And so that is something we should celebrate in NFHS, how in spite of everything, fertility rates have gone down. The COVID again is going to reverse the trends because family planning services were not available for much of the time during COVID. And even now, it's very inadequate. Essential health services are still suffering, including many other health services, but family planning, definitely there's been a crisis. So can I?
Yes. Thank you, Poonamji. I just want to point out to Aman Peshawari, who asked that question, along with Poonamji's answer, there is a report come out from the UN that estimates that 25 lakh families in our country lost access to family planning during the lockdown, which meant they didn't get access to the contraceptives, they didn't get access to condoms that were otherwise distributed for free, didn't get access to abortion services either. And that is likely to lead to a massive baby boom of unwanted pregnancies, which would add pressure again on families. It would lead to abandoned babies, it would lead to abandoned girls. Mr. Duggal, final words on what we can do and how we can help, and if you want to comment on anything that was said so far.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this population myth, which we talk about, the population bomb exploding, I mean, it's never been true historically. I mean, poor have never produced more children. If you look at the net number of children who survive in poor families, it's less than what is there in the middle and upper classes. So that's it's a myth that is there. So we need to, as I said earlier, we need to provide universal access to primary health care, social security, as Poonam also mentioned. If you universalize these two things, which social security, including food security, I think, and of course, we'll need a lot of money for that. We'll need at least 10 to 12 lakh crores is what we would require to provide universal access to healthcare, and it's not difficult to get it because the subsidy that goes to the corporate sector in this country is over 9 lakh crores. Speculative transactions are not taxed adequately. We have daily speculative transactions at the stock market of 7 lakh crores. So just add this up on a daily basis and see, even if you impose a 1% tax, you can generate 8% of GDP over the years. So you can actually, so resources are not a constraint. You have to start to tax the rich and the people who make money out of money, make more money out of money. So I think that's where we need to go.
And I'll give the last word to Neerja. Neerja, we're actually now trying to figure out where the money for the vaccine is going to come from. Estimates suggest we'll need 1 lakh crore rupees in order to just manufacture, transport, train people, make syringes, make needles, that sort of thing, refrigerate. And of course, taxing the rich is a highly unpopular decision, which no government really has ever wanted to do. Where's the middle ground here? Where's the break that we're going to give to our poor people and really look after them?
You know, a government sets its own priorities of where it's going to spend the money. And that is the middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you want to give relief to, and who do you not want to give relief to? And that is a political question. But considering that the votes come from this large mass, it is surprising that this large mass does not demand that their voice be heard and their needs be met. But I would say the creation of livelihoods. At the end of the day, this social welfare, the social security, these are safety nets for a population like ours, which have to be in place. Otherwise, people are going to die. People are going to be ill. But ultimately, we've got to think of creating livelihoods, Faye. There is simply no other shortcut to that. That is the big theme of the future. The creation of livelihoods. Because every family would want to, if they had the money, they'd want to look after their children.
That is true. And to assume that the poor, and in conclusion, to assume that the poor are not ambitious, that they don't want what is best for their children, is not a fair assumption. To assume that if the government were to transfer money into the bank accounts of the poor, that they would waste that money or stop working is actually quite a bigoted thought. Poor want to be able to send their children to better schools. They want their children to have a better life than that they have had. They're constantly pushing for more, and to look after basic hunger would allow them then to earn to move forward, which is what has been recommended in terms of a direct transfer scheme that can be done. But if we're asking as citizens what we can do, it's going to take a little bit of effort. But there are hundreds of thousands of NGOs in this country who are in the category of feeding poor people. You have to do a little bit of the groundwork yourself, though. You have to go out and be there when they're feeding. Take a look at the quality of the food. Take a look at who's receiving it. Take a look at the NGOs, audit papers if you have to. Get involved with a program that is feeding children more than just rice and dal, but vegetables, eggs, especially if it's a program that is focused on feeding young girls, because that will go twice as far in solving the problem that we've just talked about. It's what we can do in small measure. Will give you the peace of mind to be able to sleep at night, to know that there are few children not sleeping on an empty stomach. Because going by this number, 1 in every 3 children is sleeping hungry in our country, or as Neerja ji said, 2 in every 5 children is going to bed hungry. And that should really, really worry us. Hungry children should be our top priority, not just for the government, but for all of us who vote, for all of us who have access to social media, for all of us who can demand better from our authorities, state, center, and city. This is what we should be using our power and our access for. Because the hungry children cannot speak for themselves. They are going to depend on us to do better. This is our responsibility. As a society, it's our responsibility to look after our children better. There is no excuse for not doing that job. Hopefully, the government will focus on this more than they have done so far, the previous governments have done so far, and we'll see better results. But for now, like Neerja Chowdhury pointed out, this is the most depressing piece of information we have read this year, and we've had shockingly depressing information this year. So it's a really, really low bar. Thank you for watching. Good night.